Hi, hello. My name is Mrs. Bird, and I am an elementary music teacher. If you're here, I'm assuming it's because something in the title caught your attention. We are going to be talking about behavior. And I know, since 2020, things have been a little weird. And I want to offer you some insight on what has worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, what I'm going to try to keep this school year, and what I'm going to try to change. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. Okay, let's start from the beginning. I know that talking is probably the number one challenge that we have as teachers. The kids talk while we're talking, they talk to each other, they talk after we've told them to stop talking, they've talk after we give them some sort of call and response. Kids love to talk, and I get that. And this is what I consider a small annoyance. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we can combat those smaller annoyances so that we can save our energy for the larger ones. So one way that we can do this is we should have visual cues for behavior all throughout our classroom. So these can come in the form of posters or behavior charts, something that visually represents what it is that we expect from the children. In my classroom, we use CHAMPS, which is part of our PBIS district-wide system. So the kids are used to me giving them their expectation in terms of CHAMPS. So we talk about conversation, help, activity, movement, participation, special instructions. But that only goes so far because they're children and it goes in one ear and out the other. So if we have that visual representation up around our room, it's really going to help. So if you're going to put up any visuals in your room, make sure that they function for your classroom and they're not just there taking up decorative space. I believe that the classroom should be like your second home, but I also believe that the decor that we choose should function in instruction. So if you're going to choose cutesy decor because you like cutesy decor, that's great, but make sure it functions towards your instruction and your classroom management. So your posters that you display should have positive behavior expectations using positive language. So I can sit quietly with my hands to myself, not don't touch your neighbor. The positivity goes a long way when giving student expectations. So your posters should be visually catchy. They could use little catchphrases, mnemonic devices. I use the classic one that says music, make good choices, use equipment properly, speak when the time is right, involve yourself, and cooperate. That one is up in my classroom. I refer to it quite a bit. It's memorable for the kids. So let's talk a little bit about behavior charts. When I say behavior charts, I mean behavior charts for entire classes. Please do not do individual behavior charts. It is 2023. We know that those hurt kids. So if you're still clipping kids up and down individually, please stop. It's not doing anything to help the student. I'm talking about full class. So if you want to keep track of your full class record, go for it. I stopped doing that a long time ago because I can't keep up with it. My ADHD brain just will not allow me to do it. But if you want to do it, great. If the kids in your school respond to competition, wonderful. My kids, they don't really care. So we don't do that anymore, but you could totally do that in your classroom. So if you want to set up, some people use like notes on the piano or guitars or whatever cutesy musical theme thing you want to do, go for it. If it works for your kids, I say, why not try it? In my classroom, I don't do that. So I will tell you what I do in my classroom here in just a second. But if it works for you, you should absolutely give it a try. Visual reminders of how the kids are doing. So this is what I do in my classroom. I have on my board little touch lights that have the letter M, the letter U, the letter S, the letter I, the letter C, and then my student leader. Their job is when I catch the class doing one of the 5 music rules, they simply get up and go and touch a light. No, I don't make the letter correspond to the rule that I caught them all doing. So for example, if I caught them all making good choices, I'm not going to say Maestro go light up the letter M because we're making good choices. Again, I can't keep up with that, but if you can, go for it. I just keep it generic. I just tell the kids, hey, I saw everybody was doing X, Y, and Z. Maestro, go push a light. And then the maestro pushes the lights. That visual reminder is what I believe is probably my strongest classroom management technique because it gives the kids a visual of how they're all functioning together in a group. So when their teacher walks in, there doesn't have to be a big conversation about how it went that day. The teacher can check the lights and he or she knows how we did that day. Now, I do handle individual behavior problems in a different way, and I will talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, as the class is progressing and doing a great job, we light up our lights. Sometimes the classroom teachers take that into their classroom and they say, oh, you earned all your lights and music. You earn the letter C in compliment or whatever. So if you want to work with your teammates and your classroom teacher teammates and want to make that a school-wide thing that you do, absolutely have those conversations. I have some teachers that it's neither here nor there for them in their classroom, but they know that it's my expectation. So when they drop off their kids, they tell the kids, I want all 5 lights. Remember, we're going for all 5 lights. And it really, really helps. And I encourage you to try something similar. Icons or symbols. If you want to use what our lovely special education friends use for our students who are nonverbal, those very simple visual aids, I'll put some here for you to see. If you want to use those throughout your room, they are great, not just for our special education community, but for all the children, because the visuals are very simple and they're very to the point, and all you have to do is point at it and a kid gets like, oh, I should be sitting down, or oh, I shouldn't be touching that. And I found that just kind of keeping those little visual prompts really does help all the students. So you could use that as well. You could do sign language. Some teachers do some sign language things, you know, for moving around the classroom, like this is restroom, water, those kinds of things. I don't do it. Again, I can't keep up with it all. So the kids just raise their hand and ask me for stuff. As long as I am mitigating those smaller disruptions, those smaller behavioral distractions, you would be surprised at how much that nips those tiny little annoying behaviors in the bud. So if you are consistently giving a behavior check-in throughout your class, you'll be surprised at how smooth it goes. Include these behavioral conversations within the lesson. So if you're teaching a drumming lesson or you're teaching recorders or whatever, throw out things like, oh, remember, we're going to use equipment properly by doing blah, 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 blah. That way you're not making behavior like a separate thing. They need to kind of always be aware of what your expectation is for whatever activity they are participating in. Another thing that I find helpful are visual timers. So if I do have an individual student sit out or sit away from, take a turn out or something like that, I do set a timer. Usually they're those little, what do you call those things? They come in board games, hourglass timers. I do have a big 3-minute timer that I got like at the Learning Zone or something like that. You can set a reminder on your phone. You could set it on an iPad or something. But those visual reminders keeps the kids that get super anxious, kind of helps with their anxiety because they can see the passing of time. And that really, really, truly does help. That, and you don't have to keep up with it. The timer goes off, the kid is done, they come in, they join the activity again. No harm, no foul. Okay, Emily, so that's all well and good. I now know how to manage my groups, but what do we do when we're in the midst of teaching and we're having to deal with behavior? Well, let's talk a little bit about when it's happening. When are these misbehaviors happening? It's typically in the transitions. So if the kids are busy engaged in an activity, they're less likely to be talking or bumping into each other or whatever chaotic things children do. So the sooner you can get them into an activity, the better. But I get it. When we transition from one place to the other in my classroom, that's typically when I face the behavior problems too. So let's talk about ways that we can transition effectively and smoothly in our class. So transitions, you can choose to do them musically or not. It used to be back in the early 2000s, musical transitions were like the thing. I attended multiple workshops on musical transitions on, singing or chanting or saying an ostinato or something like that as we go from one place to the other. And I still do a little of that. But I found that 2020 period, children, they're just built different. And I needed to kind of adapt what I was doing and change it. So if I have a class that can still do those musical transitions, then I will absolutely do them. But if I have a class that's struggling, I'm going to drop the musical things and I'm going to give them different instructions. And you know what? The kids, they adapt, they figure it out. They're like, oh, this time we're doing it this way. Remember, above all else, children are very resilient. And as long as you are consistent, they're going to pick it up. What does a musical transition look like? You can maybe play a chime or a bell or a bell pattern, or you can use like your recorder. I have a Gark line that's like this tiny little recorder that, just the novelty of it usually is enough to get their attention. And you can use that to kind of get their attention, to give them further instructions. Or you can do a countdown. This is my favorite way to manage a transition. So I count back from 5, and in between each number, I give an expectation. So for example, if I was doing a transition from putting our instruments on the shelf to sitting in our spots, I would say in 5 seconds, we're going to be seated in our spot crisscross. In 4 seconds, in 4, we're going to be crisscross applesauce, hands in our laps. In 3, I'm going to have my conversation will have stopped with my neighbor. In 2, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. So I'm giving them micro steps because sometimes kids need that. They need that little micromanaging along the way. And you know what? I found that when I do that, the kids respond. I'm not arguing for power. I know that I'm giving them a little flexibility in those 5 seconds, and it ends up, I get done in 5 seconds, and I'm not spending the next 5 minutes arguing with kids and saying, you should have done blah, 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 and you know better. No, they don't. Clearly, they need reminders, and it's going to be okay. We have to let go of that you should know better mentality because they don't. For whatever reason, the children now don't, and it's okay. Teachers who are stuck in their ways and are not being flexible and adaptable to the children that we have in our classroom right now, they're the ones that are struggling the most. But if we can get out of our own head and realize that this is not a power struggle, that this is very much just a way this is something that needs to be taught in addition to the content, and we just teach it within the content, everybody's going to have a better time. The kids are going to be happier. You're going to be happier. Everything's going to run smoother. And you're going to notice those smaller behavior problems are going to pretty much cease to exist. Another thing that you can do is a call and response. So for example, in my classroom, I say music, the kids say rocks. And that means that they stop, they look, and they listen. In my classroom, it works about 75% of the time. Usually the kids say rocks, and then they turn around and they continue doing whatever they were doing before. And that's where I start to feel frustrated and annoyed. And that's why I start going, So usually I do music, they go rocks, and I start going, in 5, we're going to do blah, 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 blah. In 4, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. So I still do the call and response, but then I add the counting to it, and it's just made things a lot better. You can have assigned roles if you want kids that are maybe older classes, older grade levels. If you want certain students to help with certain times of transitions, you could always do that. I've not ever particularly tried that, but I know some colleagues of mine have, and I've had great success with it. So for example, you could have a kid that they're assigned to make sure the instruments are put away appropriately on the shelf, or you can have a kid that's assigned to returning the bars on instruments, or you can have a kid that's assigned to making sure that all the ukuleles are put away in numerical order. You can assign those smaller tasks to a kid. That way you can turn around and focus on something else. I don't do it that way because I kind of teach the whole class to be responsible for their stuff, because I ingrain it starting in kindergarten, and my teaching partner supports it. So if they have me in kindergarten, but then they have her in first grade, we're very similar in those expectations, so they don't feel like a big jerk of how, oh no, it's completely different. But we do have expectations on how they get their instruments out, how they put them away, how they handle them once they are seated. All of that's pretty similar between the two classrooms, and I think that helps out the kids a lot. If that is still not, if none of these are working, you can incorporate some visual reminders into your transitions, maybe stop signs, start signs, big pictures of someone going like this, or those kinds of things if you need further support. Whatever strategy you do, plan it. Write it in your lesson plan. So that way you are consistently doing it and you're consistently laying those expectations so that by the 6th week or so, kids have picked it up. So if you are not making your transitions intentional and if you are not planning to do them a specific way every single time, the children get confused and that is what leads to the chaos. So try to be very, very consistent with your segue when you go from one activity to the other. And I would always make the transition from, for example, if I'm going from the carpet to a singing game, I would make that transition expectations the same every single time. If I'm transitioning from barred instruments back to the carpet, I would make that transition, the expectations the exact same every single time. I wouldn't have a million things for the kids to remember. They can't remember that. They come to music once a week if you're lucky, right? So I would just, try to be as consistent as you can. I understand that kids interrupt us in the middle of our transitions. So we're trying to count down an expectation. We're trying to give directions and the kid's like, can I go to the bathroom? Can I get tissues? Can I blah, blah, blah. So that's why you need to have set those expectations up the first couple of weeks of school. So that way you don't get those interruptions. So this is about specific planning and specific execution of expectations. Now, are you still going to have the kids that forget? Yes. Are you still going to have interruptions? Yes. That's why this works. I just do this to whatever kid's trying to ask me something. So if I'm in the middle of giving an expectation, I go like this and the kid goes, because they kind of know like, oh, yeah, it's not my turn. I'm not doing it to be rude. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Of course, their needs are important to me and they know that because I've built a rapport with the kids. But the power of the hand, use it. Use it. Do not respond to children when they interrupt you. Do not engage. Just go like this. And you continue with what you were doing. They're going to go, trust me. But they know that this is, oh yeah, I'm supposed to wait. I'm not supposed to interrupt Mrs. Bird. And it's not a power thing. It's not like I'm more important than you. It's your words are important to me and I can't attend to them right now because I'm in the middle of using my words. So if you could wait for my words to be done, I can listen to your words. And I frame it that way and I tell them your words are incredibly important to me, but you got to let me finish mine so that I can attend to yours. And then we move on. Try not to engage in power struggles. So let's talk about when the kids get the wiggles. I get it. Your class is only 45 minutes long, 50 minutes long, but kids still need brain breaks. That's a long time, especially for little kids. So it's okay to include those movement breaks in your lesson plans. It's okay to do a go noodle in the middle of your music class. It's okay to have movement games. It's okay to do some stretching, all of that, because kids, they just need to turn it off for just a second and then engage. So if you're asking them to attend to a high concentration activity for any longer than their age, plus or minus about 5 minutes, you're asking way too much. So if you're asking a kindergartner to sit longer than 10 minutes, you're asking way too much. They just are not able to. So you've got to really, really think about that in your planning on how are you going to get the kids up and moving or doing something different or engaging in a different skill, because if not, they're going to get the wiggles and they're going to entertain themselves. And that's when you start to lose control of your classroom. When you do choose to give instructions to kids, make sure you're using very clear, very explicit instructions. Kids are very literal and they're very concrete, especially when they're young. So if you tell them, go have a seat over there, they have no idea what you mean. You need to say, you're part of the blue team, so you need to go to where the blue team line is, and you're going to sit behind Amelia. Amelia, raise your hand. Amelia raises her hand. Do you see Amelia's hand raised? Okay, you're going to go sit behind Amelia. Who are you sitting behind? Amelia. Okay, please go there. And then they will walk and they will go. If you just say, go sit over there, they're going to find their bestie to sit next to. They sat over there like you told them to, and then now you're upset because you know you sit behind Amelia. No, they don't know. They don't know they sit behind Amelia, and that's okay. Even though it's the 20th week of school. Just give up the power struggle. Just give up the power struggle. Just give it up. Just tell them where they sit and move on. I know you want to be like, well, you should remember, and it's about responsibility and blah, 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 blah. That is not your battle. You don't see them often enough. Can you encourage them? Absolutely. Can you say, you know what, next time if you remember where you sit, I'm going to give you a sticker? Sure, go for it. But don't spend 5 minutes berating a child about why you don't remember. Because there could be some reason that they don't remember. Because if their brain is too full of trauma to remember anything else, then they don't care that they sit behind Amelia. They don't even know whether they're going to eat dinner or not. So just remember they sit behind Amelia for them, and the world's going to be so much easier. Our job is to give them a softer landing place. That's our job. Don't make it any harder for kids. That's not okay. So release the power struggle. When you're giving those explicit, specific instructions, you cannot be too specific. So if you want them to hold their rhythm sticks a certain way, you're going to need to give them specific instructions. You're going to pinch, you're going to blah, and then next, and then next, and then next. Okay, show me step 1, bloop, bloop. Step 2, bloop, bloop. Step 3, bloop, bloop. You're going to have to do that starting in kindergarten. And don't assume that your 5th graders will retain it. Just got to go over it again. You can go faster with a 5th grader. You maybe don't need to give as many steps with a 5th grader because they can kind of fill in the gaps, but you still need to give them some helpful language. They're children too. I think we forget that 5th graders are still children, and they're very much still children. They've only been alive for 10 or 11 years, and they don't know. So be kind to your 5th graders, and they'll be kind to you. If you are finding that your instructions are not working and you're not getting the response that you feel like you should, you need to check your language and what it is that you ask the child to do, because I guarantee you it's your problem, not theirs. I know that's hard to hear, but it is your problem. So you've got to figure out how to restructure your expectations to get exactly what you want. You know how I know? Because I made that mistake for a very long time. Probably the first 8 to 10 years of my career, I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get kids to do exactly what I wanted them to do. And it's because my instructions were never explicit enough. It was when I really started doing some research and some reading about how to give kids expectations that I learned a lot. Also being a mom, and being a mom of a child that has autism too, my expectations had to be very clear, very concise, and I had to do frequent check-ins. Did you remember to do blah, 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 blah? I can't just say, okay, do your morning routine, because that's too much information at one time and I don't know how to organize it all in my brain. So if I say, okay, remember your morning routine includes this, 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 this. Okay, go start. And then I check in midway. Have you done blah, blah, blah? Okay, next is blah, blah, blah. And I do that same thing with the children in my classroom. I'm going to say, okay, we're going to put away our rhythm sticks. Remember, we leave our sticks on the floor. Show me sticks on the floor. You don't need them anymore. And they put their sticks down and they put their little hands up and we say, okay, our hands are empty. And so we fold our hands. And then I'm like, okay. And then now the red team is going to stand up. They're going to return their sticks. Is the red team going to play their instruments? No. Okay. All right, red team, please stand. Remember, don't play. And I'm just the whole time giving them very, very specific instructions and intentional positive praise. If I'm seeing what I want, I'm praising the snot out of it. Good job, guys. Oh my goodness, look at the red team go. They're doing this, blah, 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 blah. Because that way when I'm 6 rows over and I'm finally getting to, the purple team, they've seen it modeled enough that I can say, okay, purple team, let's do it, or whatever. But if you don't make following expectations fun, they're not going to want to do it. So you be fun, but be authentic. Don't be that teacher that's like, everybody's doing such a good job when like 50 of them are spinning around on the floor. So be very specific and very intentional with your feedback, and you're going to get exactly what you want from children. Okay, here's the discussion everyone wants to talk about. What do we do with the consistent disruptive behaviors? I've had students elope. I've had students throw things. I've had students threaten me and their classmates. It's not, I'm not without that experience. So if you're going through that on your campus, I'm right there with you. Let's talk about the difficult behaviors. Now, some of you might know this. I have a degree in psychology. My specialization is child development. So I know a lot about the brain, and I know a lot about how kids think. And that has helped me tremendously since the pandemic, because kids are traumatized. Adults are traumatized. And the way the world is right now is a traumatic experience for everyone. I tell my kids my number one job is to keep them safe, and my number two job is to teach them music. So every kid that walks in my door knows that Mrs. Bird has got their back and then some, because it's true. Is it what I signed up for 18 years ago? Not necessarily. Has it evolved in the last 18 years? Yeah. Am I still going to do everything I can to make sure that those kids are safe? Yeah, I am. Should I have to? No. As a teacher, can I solve that problem immediately? No. So let's deal with the problems that we can try to solve. If you have a kid that is continually struggling, the chances are they are suffering from some sort of unseen trauma. Now, trauma can be in the form of unwanted advances, food security, housing security. Yeah, trauma looks a lot of different ways for kids. And if they are in a home where they're hearing a lot of yelling and screaming, that's traumatic. Even if the parents are loving towards each other and they really do love their kids and they don't think that they're harming the children at all because they're not yelling at the kids, they're yelling at each other, it's still traumatizing, right? So we are not the judge and jury of trauma. We don't get to decide what is traumatic for someone, because what's traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you. I highly suggest you read this book. And I'm going to do a separate video on that book, I promise. This book is incredibly valuable, so you should definitely read it. Parents, teachers should definitely read this book, because the author, her name is Heather Forbes, and she promotes a very compassionate and trauma-informed approach to building trust and building relationships with kids, addressing a kid's emotional and sensory needs in and under the umbrella of trauma. So as an elementary music teacher, you can use several trauma-informed strategies to support a very disruptive student. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of things that have worked for me. You can establish a very safe and supportive environment. In my classroom, I have a list of like community, if I can find it, I'll put it here. But they're like these community like affirmations, kind of like I'm going to speak with kindness. Got it from Teachers Pay Teachers. And I will try to find the file, and I will put an example here, and I will put the TpT link in the description. So if you want to grab it, you can, because it's not my idea, it's someone else's. But I use those little visuals to have those family discussions with kids. I let the kids know that they are valued in my room, and that goes a long way. I tell kids, I love you and you are safe. Especially if I have a kid that's in the middle of a meltdown. That is what I start with. I use a very calm voice, and I tell them, you're loved and you're safe here. I promise. And then I continue to try to de-escalate. I do know how to initiate that process, but if you're not ready, you can still at least keep the kid calm until you can get some support to come into your room. So once you give that student that safe space using trauma-sensitive language, you don't ever want to, a kid that's in crisis, you don't ever want to publicly shame them. Like, oh, here we go again. Oh, if you don't stop, so-and-so is going to come in and restrain you. What? No. You're going to remind them that they're safe, they're loved, they're supported, their feelings are valid. And you're going to keep them calm, even if they're throwing things. And you're just going to calmly say, when you throw things, you could hurt someone. And I don't think you're trying to hurt anybody. But remember, if you hurt someone, there are consequences for that. When you use the positive self-talk, positive self-regulation, even if you just start talking to them about something completely non-related, like, hey, I like your shirt. Where'd you get it from? That's enough to kind of snap them out of like, wait, what? She's not going to tell me to stop doing blah, blah, blah. You're just getting them down a different path, and you're putting them in a different mindset. And then they're ready to hear you. But if a kid is in active crisis, they're not ready to hear you. So all the talking you do in the world about, you need to stop, blah, 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 is not going to help anybody. Just evacuate your room and go from there. But what about the other kids? I get it. Believe me, I get it. What about the other kids? What about Johnny? So I'm not there to be the judge and the jury of the process. I'm just there to keep kids safe. So in the moment, the safety of my class is more important. I'm going to evacuate the room. And then I'm going to try to work with Johnny and keep Johnny safe. The more predictable that you can be, the more of a broken record that you are, the safer the child will feel. So if you keep those routines that we've been talking about and that explicit instruction and you stick to that, that kid is going to build a rapport with you faster because they're going to feel safe in your room and they're going to know that your environment is a very predictable, steady place for them to be. And they're going to automatically de-escalate themselves when they come into your room because they know that there's no power struggle there. So that's why I tell you, do not engage with power struggles with children. I know you're going to want to, but don't do it because it's actually doing more harm than good. So when you establish those consistent classroom procedures and communicate very clearly with students, you're actually already in the midst of a de-escalation process and you don't even know it. When you provide those visual cues and you're giving kids multiple modes of interpreting their expectations, you're already in the de-escalation phase and you are already providing them with the support that they very desperately need. Constructive feedback. There are some kids who do not like being scolded. And so don't do it in a shaming way. Provide them with something positive. Like, I really like that you're not throwing things that are hard anymore. I know you need to get that aggression out. I appreciate that you're throwing the tissues now and you're putting them in the trash can instead of throwing them at me. It sounds ridiculous, right? But you're building safety. You're building an environment of safety and that kid's going to feel safe around you. And I guarantee you they're going to elope less. They're going to have less explosions around you. So putting that time in at the very beginning is going to be very beneficial. When you encourage students to reflect on their behavior, you're going to get more buy-in later on. So at a time when they're no longer in crisis, have that student kind of reflect on what happened that day. Have a conversation with them and find out what their trigger was, because it probably wasn't you. It probably wasn't anything in your classroom. So if it was you, if it was something in your classroom, you have control over that. You can absolutely do something to repair it, but chances are it wasn't. And chances are there might not be something that you can do about it in the moment, but at least you know what the trigger is and you can try your best to avoid it in the future. Celebrate their effort and their growth. So as you see this kid improving, celebrate it. So if they make it through one class without eloping, or they make it through a class without having a meltdown or whatever, celebrate the snot out of it, but in a way that is effective for the kids. So if they're not into positive praise, do it in like a behavior chart, or just do it in a form of, or whatever works for that kid. You will learn that there are some kids that do not like to be called out for anything, positive or negative. So you got to do what works for them. Set realistic goals for kids. So when they come into your room and you're like, I need you to stay in class the whole time. Well, now they're going to turn around and run because you just said, I'm going to hold you hostage. Nope. You're going to say, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming. And then 5 minutes into the class, when you see that they're having a good time, be like, I'm so glad that you're hanging out with us today. That's it. And every 5-10 minutes, you see that kid that normally elopes engaged in the lesson, you're going to praise it. You're going to do whatever you can to let them know that you see them and you're acknowledging them. But again, in a way that's safe for them. Encourage some risk-taking and mistakes. So if you've got a kid that melts down because they lost the game, encourage it. Not the melting down. Encourage the mistake making. Point out when you make a mistake. point out when you took a risk that maybe didn't go the way that you wanted to. Start having those conversations, because kids need to learn how to lose. And that's probably, I think, the number one trigger that I've had is gameplay, where kids just do not know how to lose. So I know that this year, one of my goals is to teach kids a language that they can use when they do lose. So what can they say if they lost? What can they say if they won? And to start already kind of building in that vocabulary for their emotional language development, so they can learn what to say to describe what they're feeling. So encourage that, emphasize that mistakes are opportunities for learning. Emphasize that mistakes are going to push us out of our comfort zone, but it's okay. It's a way that we learn and a way that we grow. It's part of the learning process. It's part of developing all of those things. These are all things that you can do with every child in your room. You do not need to isolate the kid that is having the most trouble, but by having those conversations, you are putting that vocabulary into that kid's skill set, and they are already going to learn to go back to that in their time when they are in crisis. So students enter crisis for multitudes of reasons, and you cannot try to de-escalate a student if you don't know what the antecedent is, what happened to cause the meltdown, and if you don't really know what their consequences are going to be. So you need to have conversations with the other adults in the building that are responsible for that child to make sure that you are doing the same exact strategies that other adults in the building are doing. Your strategies cannot be drastically different. It will confuse the student, and it actually might make things worse. So if you are the only teacher that's having trouble with that student, then that's an evaluation piece on you and what you can do to make your environment more friendly towards that student. But if they're kind of just generally, they have trouble in all places and all areas, then you need to be having conversations with all of the teachers, the classroom teachers, the PE teachers, the lunch room, all the places that the student goes to find out what strategies are being used. And if you find that you're the only teacher that is implementing any sort of strategy, then that is a larger conversation that you need to have with administration. Always speak to kids with compassion, and always speak to kids with kindness. Try really hard not to let your own emotions get in the way. I know when that kid is destroying your room and they're destroying the property that you paid a lot of money for, it's hard. But I guarantee you that kid's having a much harder life than you are. Thank you so much for sticking around through this video. I don't know how long it's going to be. I'm going to try to get it to under 30 minutes. But if you stuck around, I highly, highly appreciate it. If you like the video, click the like button. If you like the content, click subscribe. And you like me, hit subscribe. And we will hang out together again in the future.